My name is Sarah May. I'm a Ruby developer. For those of you that aren't Ruby developers, before they let you say that in person, they make you sign a contract in blood promising to test first. So I do a lot of testing, and in my last job, I was working at a company called LookSmart, which is a big online advertising platform. And they had been on Rails since before it was 1.0, and they had 3 or 4 years of development in Rails before they decided to do any Selenium testing at all. So I walked into this place that had this app that had hundreds of pages. It had like half a dozen different user types. It was a mess, and there's a huge amount of code to try and cover with Selenium tests. And being a Ruby developer, I was not super excited about writing Selenium tests, which was a sentiment shared by basically everyone else in the development department. And so the way that we got test coverage for all of this stuff in Selenium was that we actually hired an offshore team. It was 12 hours time difference. And every night they would write tests that covered everything that we checked in that day. And then in the morning we'd come in and we'd run obviously they ran them first before they checked them in to make sure they passed. And then we came in the morning and we would look at the tests and be like, oh, actually we needed to test this other thing, so we'd make little changes. But the basic idea was we had a separate test team temporarily until we got decent amount of test coverage and we could do it ourselves, writing all of these Selenium tests in Ruby, so that we could come in and get some kind of test coverage without totally throwing our development schedule out of whack. So the point of my talk was basically just that if you find yourself in a situation where you've got a big application, it doesn't have any tests, and you're looking at like throwing a couple of months down the drain to get all this test coverage, there's other ways you can do it that actually work surprisingly well. This was my first positive experience with outsourcing also, so it actually was a really interesting and unusual experience for me. So that's all that I wanted to say. Any questions?
So did your experience with Selenium change afterward, or what pressed you, what made it so that you had to start testing with Selenium in this case?
We started.
So what made you actually feel like you had to make the change and actually start testing with Selenium, since you had that reluctance in the beginning?
We had a lot of automated tests at the model level and at the controller level, and we had what Rails calls integration tests, which aren't really integration tests, and we had some stuff in WebRat, which doesn't actually open a browser. And so we started using more JavaScript, and so we kind of got to the point where, okay, we're not testing any of this JavaScript with any of our automated tests, and we need something that does that. So that was the motivation.
So I'm curious if you can describe the quality of those tests that that team wrote, and specifically if you have any data on how maintainable they turned out over time.
Well, we had, so the team that we had over there were actually QA people versus developers. So the initial quality of the code was not great, but they were very receptive to feedback. Basically, I wanted them to refactor it more along a page model, which is kind of standard, I think, in Selenium these days. They had done everything very like, you go to this URL, you click here. There was no sort of external classes, so I basically refactored one of them and then kind of gave them that as a script, and they kind of ran with it. So I think, Selenium is fairly straightforward in terms of the code that it generates. Obviously, it generates very procedural code, and they need a little bit of prodding, I think, to move in a more sort of object-oriented direction. But actually, once we kind of went over that, and it turned out pretty well, actually.
Okay. 12. Would you mind share us which city you outsourced from?
Oh, they were in Bangalore.
Bangalore.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.